Hello, in this video I will explain the most important macroeconomic variables of the economy of Qatar, as well as the economic impact of the World Cup in 2022. These are the topics I'm going to talk about in this presentation. There is an economic overview, the GDP, unemployment rate, inflation, balance of trade, interest rate, government debt, and monetary policy. Other than the fact that they will host the World Cup in 2022, I reckon that is such an interesting country to analyze in economic terms. In 2015, the International Monetary Fund recognized Qatar as the richest country in the world. They enjoy among the highest gross domestic product per capita in the world. With just 300,000 citizens, the inhabitants of this country do not know what employment and poverty are. First off, where is Qatar and where is it located? It is located in the Middle East region on the shore of the Persian Gulf. Qatar is a peninsula in the east of Arabia and bordering the Persian Gulf and Saudi Arabia in a strategic location near major petroleum deposits. The state of Qatar occupies 11,437 square kilometers. Turning to the economic overview in Qatar, it is not a surprise that they depend a lot on oil production. Over the last years, gas prices have led the Qatari government to tighten some of their spending to help their budget deficit. They possess one of the largest reserves in the world, the third largest. And the problem with oil is that we don't know how much is down there. But at least for them, they will allow at its current consumption to be producing oil for the next 56 years. And they have come a long way in terms of investing in another areas or sectors of the economy, so they wouldn't depend as much on the production of oil, or just they're investing in manufacturing, construction, financial services, which is a smart idea to do. Now, Qatar's GDP rank is 54 in nominal numbers. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a year. As we can see from the graph, the GDP had a steady rise from the beginning of the century up to 2015. That drop coincided with the decline of oil prices. I pull up this chart that you might see here, which shows that 2015 was a critical year for oil prices. Since then, the economy had been recovering until the pandemic period. According to the World Bank, by the end of 2020, Qatar's GDP annual growth contracted 2.5%, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic and low hydrocarbon prices. But the GDP growth already rebounded in 2021 compared to the last year. So in 2020, the GDP were $146.37 billion. So what are the predictions of the GDP for the upcoming years? The data for 2021 has not been updated, but the official websites, this is from statista.com, reckon that it was around 171,000 billion, and they predict a considerable growth pre-pandemic levels by 2024. Okay. When we analyze the GDP per capita is when things get interesting. The GDP per capita shows a country's GDP divided by its total population. In other words, is how much money is a person making in a country. It is considered to be a very important indicator of the economic strength of a country, and a positive change is an indicator of economic growth. In 2022, the GDP per capita in Qatar will amount to around $65,000. And by the way, nowadays Qatar is one of the countries with the largest GDP per capita. In Qatar, the unemployment rate measures the number of people actively looking for a job as a percentage of the labor force. The data reached an all-time high of 3.9% in December 21 and a record low of 0.1% in December 2019, which is the same number in 2021. Which is also one of the lowest rates in the world. Qataris are considered a minority in their own nation, with only 15% of them accounting for Qatar's total population. The remaining 85% is made up of a workforce of over 100 different nationalities. There are 4 factors that contribute to such low rates according to an article I found, which are workers have protected rights, there are good working opportunities, there is high salaries, and an effective social safety net in case you lose your job. The government introduce you to a program where you could find a job and train yourself. Qatar's continuous endeavor to improve the conditions of more than 2 million expatriate workers with their families and provide them with a decent life by reforming labor laws and practices related to them. Talking about inflation, these statistics show the average inflation rate in Qatar from 1886 to 2020, with projections up until 2026. In 2020, the average inflation rate in Qatar amounted to about minus 2.72% compared to the previous year, 2.72%. And in 2021 was 2.53%. In 27, as you might have noticed here, 27 and 28, 3 major factors contributed to Qatar's soaring inflation. High levels of government spending, growing demand for housing, which push up house prices and rent, and the reals pegged with the dollar. The real is the currency in Qatar, which was pushing down interest rates that further down the line. So that was the way the government of Qatar, the central bank, fixed this problem by pegging the dollar with the real. Qatar's annual inflation rate in 2022 has reached an all-time high since 2014, rising from negative 2.71% in 2020 to 3.18% in 2022, and it's being felt across all sectors: petrol, food and beverages, transportation, entertainment and culture. But what I like about this graph is that it shows the comparison between the real GDP growth, and as you might see, the red line is always above the blue line, which is the inflation rate in average consumer prices, which is very important for an economy to keep those in check. Or if you're going to grow, the GDP should be higher than the inflation rate. Qatar has been recording trade surpluses since 2004, mostly due to shipments of oil and liquefied natural gas, which accounts for 89% of total exports. Main imports are transport equipment and parts, nuclear reactors, boilers, machinery and mechanical appliances and parts, and metal-based products. Exports from Qatar soared 66.4% from a year earlier to 36.7 billion riyals in March 2022 due to the higher sales of petroleum gases and other gaseous hydrocarbons that only accounted for 50% of the exports in Qatar. These are the main trade partners of Qatar. I won't go through all of them, but we could see in the first place Japan, it represents 28% of total exports and 8% of imports. To highlight as well South Korea, China and India. And import countries, we could see United States, China, Germany, United Kingdom and India. Qatar has 3 different policy rates and 3 different interest rates. The first one is a deposit rate, the second is a lending rate, and the last is a repurchasing rate. I think the important one is the next one that I'm gonna mention. That is, this is basically what the market should be paying attention to. So given the fixed parity between the Qatari riyal and the US dollar, this is the short-term interest rate policies that have had to be subordinated to the fixed exchange rate policy. As such, the Qatar Central Bank overnight interest rates are closely related to its counterpart on the United States, the Fed funds rate, usually with a positive margin. These are the economic principles that the central bank in Qatar follows. First off would be the stability of the currency, the exchange rate for other currencies. Secondly, the stability of commodity and services prices, which is maintaining in check the inflation. And the third, maintaining a financial and banking stability. There is a very interesting monetary policy in Qatar. They basically fix the value of the Qatari riyal against the US dollar at a rate of 3.64 per US dollar, which is one Qatari riyal equals to $3.64. That is the anchor for its monetary policy. So if anything happens in the economy, the central bank will intervene by selling by selling the currency or maybe buying dollars, which is the most efficient way when you have this type of fixed rate. So what would be the economic impact of the World Cup in 2022? It's kind of difficult to measure, primarily because you don't know what would be the final investment, how many tourists are going to visit, and I think I identified this as the first reason, which is Qatar already has a recovery. We saw that in 2020 the GDP contracted to 2.5%, largely due to COVID-19 pandemic and low hydrocarbon prices. Now the projected GDP is relatively higher, and the trend is expected to be on the rise even after the games are over. So in 2022, the games will create a boom in the economic activities, with the country registering high numbers of tourists who will bring a significant amount of income to the country's economy. That is what we hope. The International Monetary Fund predicts a 3.6% in 2022. Focus Economics panelists, they predict a 4.3% rise in the same year, and possibly at 2.6% in 2023, the next year. And well, the Secretary of the Secretary General of the Committee for Delivery and Legacy, that's building the infrastructure behind this event, they say that it's about 11% of the GDP in 2019. So we also know how much investment, but that is in the next slide. So Qatar forecast is to spend more than 200 billion on construction in the next decade, and much of the money is going towards preparation for the World Cup. From ports to highways to billion-dollar stadiums, Qatar plans to spend an average of over 10% of its national output annually on building infrastructure as it prepares to host the World Cup. FIFA ruled in February that Qatar can hold the tournament in the winter to avoid summer temperatures that can top 50 degrees Celsius. Other than the projects I mentioned, there will be 8 stadiums, seven new stadiums, and most of them will be taken down after the event. And the most impressive thing for me will be a metro project in Doha, and all in all, I guess that is like the most impressive feature will be a new city. So what is this city? Is in the north of Doha. They call it Lusail City, and they built it from scratch, from the ground up. And this is an investment for the future, not only for the World Cup to host loads of tourists, but it will be very useful for the citizens of Qatar, especially expatriates, which are maybe 85% of the population are people from another countries. They are like only 15%. They represent the Qataris or local people from Qatar. Does hosting a World Cup make economic sense? Maybe not, for two reasons. There is a concept called opportunity cost, and you could invest that money somewhere else probably in infrastructure, hospitals, roads, metros, subways, and so on and so forth. However, the money that they will spend on stadiums is going to be used only once, or probably during the period of the World Cup, but it's not longer than 2 or 3 months, and then they take it down. And the second reason is the patterns of tourism changes. For example, in Beijing and London, year-on-year basis decrease in their Olympic years. In 2008 and 2000 12 respectively, while the UK's most popular museum, the British Museum, saw 22% fewer visitors during the month that the games were held. And even when tourism does increase, it doesn't necessarily produce a Pareto gain because there is a spend associated with attracting visitors. Before the 2000 World Cup in South Africa, it was predicted that around 452,000 tourists would enter the country for the tournament. In the end, only two-thirds show up. So, this was the money invested in Brazil for the World Cup. One of the most expensive stadiums is now a parking lot, and the country's preparation for the World Cup cost an estimated 11 to 14 billion. From the articles that I pull up, advanced economies should have the edge in generating a financial surplus from competitions, given that their existing exporting, hospitality, and mobility infrastructure usually requires only minor upgrades. The 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles are frequently cited as a successful and profitable competition, and the London Olympics produce 5.2 billion in revenue. What we see here is South Africa saw a boost in GDP growth leading up to the 10,000 World Cup, but this might have been the growth recovery following the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis. Economic growth since 2010 has averaged below the growth rate seen in 2004 to 2007, preceding this financial crisis. At the same time, the unemployment rate rose above 25% leading up to the tournament, and in the subsequent years has averaged 25.6%. In Brazil's case, the timing of the World Cup could have not have been worse, taking place amid significant political turmoil and just after the country entered a deep recession. Real GDP growth was positive in the last half of 2014, but the economy contracted throughout 2015 and 2016. The unemployment rate at the time of the World Cup registered 6.8% and even fell slightly in the months following the World Cup. However, unemployment has soared since early 2015, and the jobless rate is currently 12.9%. So coming back to my point of saying that advanced economies should have the edge in generating a financial surplus from competitions, we see that the next World Cup in 2026 will be staged in Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and this is a really smart decision, primarily because these countries already have the infrastructure, the stadiums, hotels, and everything to host this event. Even though Mexico is not an advanced country, in the cities that the event will be held, there is already a lot of this infrastructure in the proper environment to host the event. So yeah, it might be we might be better off holding the event, hosting the event on countries like this. I'm gonna do a comparison between Qatar and Mexico, and this is just a rather simple data and information. A small surface and a small population in Qatar, and a large surface area and a larger population in Mexico. So the economic relationship between Qatar and Mexico is a bilateral relationship where some products get better deals, but this is not a free trade agreement. So we are nowhere near to being the first trading partner. Qatar is Mexico's 61st trading partner worldwide. The main products that Mexico exports to Qatar are primarily in manufacturing industry, vehicles for the transport of goods, passenger cars, and refrigerators. Mexico imports from Qatar mainly natural gas, aluminum alloys, and urea. Natural gas. This is a comparison between the main indicators in Qatar and Mexico. I would like to highlight the GDP per capita, which is 5 times higher in Qatar. And there is a surplus in Qatar. Deficit. We look at the deficit as opposed to Mexico that has an actual deficit. So Qatar has a surplus. And the debt is substantially higher in Qatar with 72.61%, but I think they can afford it. So what would happen if you live in Qatar instead of Mexico? You would live 2.7 years longer, make 6.2 times more money, you would be 2.6 times more likely to be unemployed, and 51.5% more likely to have internet access, and Qatar is 0.2 times more expensive than Mexico. And if we laid out a map, Mexico is about 170 times bigger than Qatar, so it's rather just a small country. Let's look at the net international trade, Mexico with Qatar. Here in the red lines, we see the imports, and the blue ones represent the exports. The main sale from Mexico to Qatar in 2021 was tubes and pipes of iron or steel, and the main product bought by Mexico was aluminum, as I mentioned before. So we see a clear deficit from the perspective of Mexico throughout this period from 2008 up to 2021, and it will more likely continue that way. Finally, I wanted to see how Qatar is doing in terms of pollution. So I found many graphs like this one. This shows the carbon emissions per capita per year, and I also compare it to Mexico. Qatar is about the production they throw off every year is about 40 tons, and Mexico is really low, maybe about 3 or 4 per capita. So when we look at this graph, the carbon emissions global, so we just saw the carbon emissions per capita, but now we see it as a country as a whole. Then Mexico, the Mexican contribution is 1%, and Qatar is less than 4%. So overall, they contribute less than Mexico and many other countries. In this graph, we see what are the sources of carbon emissions by fuel. We see at the top of the list gas, and the rest is divided between oil, cement, and flaring. But clearly there is a tendency here of gas and the selling of petroleum, which is the main contributor to the economy of Qatar. And finally, in greenhouse emissions by sector, we see at the top of the list electricity and heat, then manufacturing and construction, transport, aviation, and shipping, and then other items which could be other fuel combustion, fugitive emissions, industry waste, buildings, agriculture, and land use change and forestry. Well, just to wrap up this session, what is the future in Qatar? We see that there are more than 150 large-scale projects to be offered, and they're focusing primarily on expanding their economy and not depending so much on the production of gas and oil every year. Well, that was it. Goodbye. Take it easy.